Welcome to our new program, False Friends of Fatima. Chris Ferrara, our guest, here, has written this book, this blockbuster of a book, False Friends of Fatima. Take a good look at the front cover. It tells you what the false friends are doing. Just as Judas betrayed Christ with a kiss, the false friends of Fatima betray Our Lady of Fatima with acts of devotion. Welcome to our program, Chris, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, Father. You inspired it, as you have so many other projects I've done, and I think it was a good idea to put into one place a collection of the evidence about people and groups in the church who portray themselves as friends of the Fatima message and profess to have a pious attachment to the Fatima event and to Our Lady of Fatima. At the same time, they're undermining it by reducing it to, I guess, the ecclesiastical equivalent of a self-improvement program, rather than what it really is, which is a prophecy and a warning for the church and the world about the consequences of failing to carry out what Our Lady of Fatima requested, which is the consecration of Russia, a very politically incorrect thing to do, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, so that Russia will be converted.
And so that Russia
to the Catholic faith
will lead the way to bringing the world to a period of peace. Russia, as in the message of Fatima, as Lucius explained, is an instrument of God's choice, either an instrument of justice or an instrument of mercy. If the Pope and the bishops consecrate Russia, then Russia becomes an instrument of mercy for all mankind. And if the Pope and the bishops don't consecrate Russia, Russia becomes an instrument of chastisement for all mankind. But it's our choice if we will listen to Our Lady of Fatima or not. We obviously deserve the punishment that God has prepared for us because of all the abortion and the homosexuality and all the other sins that, as Pope John Paul II said, have institutionalized themselves. The world's gone in the opposite direction from what Our Lady of Fatima indicated. And so the result of that will be, as Our Lady herself said, war is a punishment for sin. So we will have these wars coming about and all the rest of it if Russia is not consecrated. And we will be enslaved by Russia if Russia is not consecrated.
That's the prophetic element. It's also a warning. And there's another aspect of the warning, too, the famous third secret of Fatima, which, as we all know, begins with the famous phrase, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. Lucy having added the etc. to indicate that
there's
the
more
Virgin
to come.
had much more to say,
yes.
And it obviously related to dogma outside of Portugal. And that aspect of the message of Fatima is also being suppressed by the false friends. But maybe we could talk about why the people who are opposed to the message of Fatima in places low and high in the church have to be false friends in the first place. Why can't they come right out and say, well, we don't believe in this message?
Or why can't they not just ignore Fatima either? First of all, I think what happens is that the devil knows that when Our Lady of Fatima's message is implemented, truly implemented by the Pope and the bishops, as well as by the faithful, when it's truly implemented, then his regime in the world is over. So the devil he's very sly and very cunning, and so his first line of defense, as far as I can tell, is to not talk about Fatima at all. But obviously, in events of such historic proportions, 70,000 witnesses to the miracle of the Sun, it's pretty hard to bury something that's so brilliant. So for those people who hear about Fatima, then he's got the second tactic, which
well,
is...
Well, yeah, and the thing about the message is, because it comes from the Mother of God, if you begin to undermine the message openly, if you denigrate it openly, you're touching a vein of Marian piety that still runs very deep among people. For example, in Italy, even though Italy has become corrupted by liberalism and is in many respects a decadent society, if you begin to attack Our Lady, an Italian will instinctively rise to her defense, even if he's lost the faith. There's a love for the Mother of God, which is bound up in the authenticity of this whole message. So they can't attack it.
Yeah.
They can't attack it also because the popes themselves have time and time again lent their authority to attestations of its authenticity. Pope after pope after pope. 7
popes actually in a row, between Pius XI, Pius XII, John XXIII, Paul VI, John Paul I, and John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, all of them.
Yes, so and of course there was the miracle of the sun witnessed by 70,000 people, which even Warner Brothers had to acknowledge as an actual historical event when it made a movie about the miracle of the sun.
Back in '52, yes.
And that movie is still selling today. You can get it on Amazon.com. It's one of the more popular titles from that period. And so this is an authentic historical event involving a Catholic's instinctive love for the Mother of God,
And Our Lady, in turn, showing her maternal love for each and every one of us and for mankind in general. In fact, it was Benedict the 15th in 1917 who asked Our Lady to show him and mankind the way out of World War I. And she came 8 days later to answer his question, exactly that.
And Sochi says in his book, The Fourth Secret of Fatima, that while the Church is normally very cautious about granting approbation to apparitions of any kind, in this case we have an absolutely unique series of verifications coming from the highest authorities in the Church, including John Paul II, who not only established the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima on May 31st,
May 13th.
May 13th rather, of the the calendar of the Roman liturgy, but also beatified Jacinta and Francisco.
Yes, the two seers.
What more do we need? So Sochi says the message of Fatima is in a category all by itself. To dismiss it as a private revelation is simply ludicrous. It was obviously meant for the Church and the world. The popes themselves have attested to its authenticity. So, getting back to the subject, if you're going to attack the message of Fatima, you can't do it openly. The best way to do it is to pose as a friend of the message, but change the meaning of the message. So you say, of course, Fatima is a wonderful event, wonderful thing, what happened at Fatima.
And I love Our Lady of Fatima. So
yes, but it's such an important message. You should always stress the importance of the Fatima message if you want to be a false friend of Fatima. In fact, you constantly tell people that the message of Fatima has enduring importance and enduring relevance. It's more important today, in fact, say the false friends of Fatima, than ever before. So important. But then when it comes down to the question of why is it important, that's where the false friends do their work. They say the importance of the message of Fatima today is that we're all called upon to be good Catholics, to offer prayers and do penance as Our Lady requested, which she did. She did request prayer and penance, and that is an integral
And she wants us to be good Catholics too.
Of course, that's all part of it.
See, by telling a lie, by telling the truth about something, but to the exclusion of the other part of the truth that they're leaving out.
Yes, and this is a tactic employed by what Pope St. Pius X, the last pope to be canonized, called the modernists. And that, we're going to get into that in a minute, I think, in this discussion. But what the modernist does, and we'll define modernist in a moment, is he very cleverly conceals one truth by emphasizing another, constantly talking about the other truth to hide the truth that is even more important. So, for example, the modernists will constantly stress the humanity of Christ, his humanity, his humanity, his humanity, which of course is an aspect of Christ. We're talking about two natures in one divine person, a human nature and a divine nature. But if you're constantly stressing the humanity of Christ, you forget the divine nature. And this is what the false friends of Fatima are doing when they stress prayer and penance. Prayer and penance. We will see as we go through this series the drumbeat.
Well, in fact,
that these false friends are...
The Fatima message is only prayer and penance.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. That's
well, they may not even say that. They may say, it used to be about the consecration of Russia and the Third Secret, but that's all in the past. We've already accomplished the consecration. The Third Secret is revealed. And now all that's left is prayer and penance. Prayer and penance, prayer and penance. They'll say it 1,000 times. And of course, prayer and penance are truths pertaining to the message of Fatima. But then they hide the real truth that remains to be accomplished.
Well, I think one of the things I think we should perhaps explain a little bit is about the fact that, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, that God sends prophets to every generation. Now, why would, but at the same time, he says God, not to give a new doctrine. In the Old Testament, the prophets also not only exhorted people to pray and do penance and to convert themselves, which of course the message of Fatima also does, but they also gave new teachings about, further details, like Isaiah talks about the suffering of Christ in chapter 53. They're not described anywhere else except in chapter 53 like that. So he's giving new teaching or new predictions, but in this case, in Fatima, all the doctrine has already been taught. The doctrine is there. But so why does God send prophets in the New Testament, in our time, in this age? And it's because God needs to send reminders of things that people tend to overlook or de-emphasize. And so God sends Our Lady of Fatima to emphasize certain truths which are unpopular in certain circles in the Church, and apparently, especially in the Vatican these days. So God, as St. Paul says, don't despise prophecy. Do not distinguish the Holy Spirit. Do not despise prophecy. Test all things, hold fast which is good. Fatima has been tested, it's been found to be good. There are other apparitions which are not true, but they claim to be from Our Lady, but they're not. But Fatima, we know, is certain. It's been approved by the Church. It's been tested and found to be good. So we should not extinguish the Spirit. We should not despise it, but not just take half of it and ignore the other half, or pretend the other half doesn't count. That's what these false friends do.
Yeah, and St. Thomas in the Summa specifically says that when God sends a prophet, and there's no greater prophet than the Mother of God herself, it is not to give us new doctrine, but to prescribe something for the reform of conduct in that age.
Yeah.
You must do this or else.
Yeah.
So it's usually in the form of an ultimatum. And there is a Fatima ultimatum which involves the consecration of Russia. Consecrate Russia or else you will suffer not only wars and persecutions of the Church, not only martyrdom, but ultimately the annihilation of nations. And then there is also the third secret of Fatima, which clearly predicts a catastrophe within the Church that involves the dogmas of the faith, discipline in the Church, and also, because of this catastrophe in the Church, a parallel chastisement of the world. Because as the Church goes, so goes the world. What is holding back the divine wrath?
Well,
The witness of Catholics, as you have said many times.
Well,
if the salt loses its savior, as our Lord warned,
yes.
it will be trampled underfoot.
Be thrown, nothing good for nothing was thrown underfoot. So and that's what in fact, Cardinal Ratzinger, now Benedict XVI, when he said this, the third secret is about the dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore the life of the world. The dangers threatening the faith. When the faith gets lost, then the salt loses its flavor. Therefore, it's thrown out. The former faith will get trampled underfoot. And then what's left to hold back the wrath of God? Nothing. And therefore the life of the world. It's all there in that one parable, but it's also in the third secret. Of course, that's the part they haven't revealed to us.
Well, so we see then that we have these false friends. They're trying to rewrite the message of Fatima by emphasizing one truth to the exclusion of the other. And then the question is, well, why? Why would they do this? Why wouldn't they be eager to see the accomplishment of the message of Fatima in its fullness? What is the motive for this strange behavior? And that would involve setting forth for the viewers the context in which this whole controversy has arisen. And that context is obviously the state of the Church today, which has to be seen as completely unprecedented in the history of the Church. The Church has had crises before, maybe the worst of which was the Arian crisis.
In the 4th century.
When the great body of bishops and many of the faithful came to believe effectively that Christ was not truly God, but essentially an exalted creature. And that heresy racked the Church for 50 or 60 years. But this is even worse. This situation involves not just a heresy, but a complete collapse within the Church in terms of adherence to doctrines and dogmas, and also in the discipline of the Church, the liturgy and so forth. And what we see is what Pope Benedict described regarding the state of the world and the crisis in the Church. I say this in the introduction. He talks about the fall of the Roman Empire. He's speaking as Pope. And in his address to the Roman Curia in December of 2010, he said this, speaking of the Roman Empire, and comparing it to our situation. The sun was setting over an entire world. Frequent natural disasters further increased the sense of insecurity. There was no power in sight that could put a stop to this decline. Then he went on to say, moral consensus is collapsing, consensus without which juridical and political structures cannot function. Consequently, the forces mobilized for the defense of such structures seem doomed to failure. And then he said, the future of the world is at stake. And then, one other thing, Father. Pius XII, speaking in an encyclical written, I believe, in 1951 on the promotion of Catholic missions,
Yes.
said this, Venerable brethren, you are well aware that almost the whole human race is today allowing itself to be driven into two opposing camps, for Christ or against Christ. The human race is involved today in a supreme crisis which will issue in its salvation by Christ or in its dire destruction. That's the Pope speaking in 1951. What would he say today?
Well, and Pope Benedict XVI is saying pretty well the same thing in his own way, which is we are in such a crisis. I mean, first of all, to give some sort of historical context, the Roman Empire was what sort of held all the peoples together, so to speak, from Britain to some place in Asia, I mean, it's a vast extent, pretty well all of Europe, certainly the southern part of Europe and much of the northern part, and all the way to, not to Ireland, but to Britain, even to the gates of Scotland, and all the way over to past the Holy Land, somewhere further in my history, my geography is not great here, but, and here he's saying that the sun almost didn't set, now that the empire was coming apart because of its internal collapse, and he's saying that
an entire world.
And they said today, now we're talking about the whole world. This is the whole known world pretty well then, but now we're talking about the whole globe. But he says it's worse than the fall of the Roman Empire. And of course, there's mobs and looting and all sorts of crimes going on because there was no army or police or anyone that could keep that in order. And he's saying what he calls the forces of security. He's talking about the police, the army, the home guard, whatever you want to call them. All these forces, none of them will be able to maintain against the horde of humanity taking the law into their own hands and killing and doing all sorts of terrible things because we've lost this moral sense, this moral consensus.
And why have we lost it? That's the second aspect of this context in which these false friends of Fatima have emerged. We've lost it because the bulwark against immorality, moral chaos, social collapse, the Catholic Church has suffered a crisis unlike any in her history. And here in the book I quote the amazing admissions of Paul VI after the Second Vatican Council. And here is what he said, in something that's often quoted, but I present in the book the entire context of the statement. And I think it has to be read for the viewers so they understand that we're not doomsayers. We're simply pointing out in this book and elsewhere in the works of your apostolate what the popes themselves have diagnosed. And here's what Paul VI said in his Insegnamenti, Volume 10, 1972, page 707. By some fissure, meaning a crack in the church, the smoke of Satan has entered into the temple of God. The Pope is saying this. There is doubt, uncertainty, problems, unrest. Doubt has entered our consciences, and it has entered through the windows which were meant to have been opened to the light. He's talking about this great opening to the world that was supposed to have happened at Vatican II, whereas John the 23rd said to a reporter one day, walking over to a window and throwing open the window, we're going to let fresh air into the church by opening the windows to the modern world. Well, the modern world came in all right, but it wasn't fresh air, it was smoke. And here is the Pope admitting it. And then he goes on to say, this state of uncertainty reigns even in the church. It was hoped that after the council, there would be a day of sunlight in the history of the church. Instead, there came a day of clouds, of darkness, of groping, of uncertainty. How did this happen, he asks. And he answers his own question. We will confide our thoughts to you. There has been interference from an adverse power. His name is the devil. Yes. This is the Roman pontiff saying this. Well, and we so-called traditionalists are accused of being hysterical doomsayers. I don't think I've written anything nearly as dramatic as this admission of Paul VI.
But in fact, Our Lady, Lucy says that the devil is in the mood for a final battle. The devil thinks he's going to win this battle, although, as it's been pointed out, the devil knows he's going to lose because God has told him he's going to lose, but nevertheless, iniquity has lied to itself. The devil has lied to itself to the point he thinks he's going to win this battle, and certainly in some ways he's winning some part of this war and the first thing is attacking the faithful. This is Lucy's famous interview with Father Fuentes in 1957.
Absolutely.
Attacking especially the priests and the religious. And by dragging them to hell, he's dragging many of their followers, of the lay people, because they've lost their leadership.
Now, let not the viewer think that this was some bad hair day for Paul VI. Yeah. Well, I don't think he really had much hair. And that he got over it later on and everything was hunky-dory. No. Pope Benedict, speaking as Cardinal Ratzinger, completely confirms Paul VI's diagnosis and actually refers back to it. Here's what he said in a passage I quote in my book, in the so-called Ratzinger Report, page 29 of that book, which was published by Ignatius Press in 1986. He said this, speaking also about the aftermath of the council, as Paul VI did. Quote, developments since the council seem to be in striking contrast to the expectations of all, beginning with those of John the 23rd and Paul VI. Christians are once again a minority, more than they ever have been since the end of antiquity. What the popes and the council expected was a new Catholic unity, and instead one has encountered a dissension which, to use the words of Paul VI, quoting him, seems to have passed over from self-criticism to self-destruction.
So the crisis in the, which we talked about earlier, from that the crisis is going to bring about the rioting and the wars and the enslavement and all the rest of it, is a result of the falling apart of the church. The church, of course, is indestructible. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But nevertheless, people who have left the church or who are weak in the faith could easily be pulled away. And what we see, for example, and it's unprecedented in the church. Now, Cardinal Chappie says the secret of Fatima talks about this being the time of the great apostasy.
That's right, and you make it a crucial point. We're not saying the church is going to be destroyed. When we talk about self-destruction, it's in a relative sense. There's a crisis in the church. Yeah. The church will survive this crisis with the aid of Our Lady of Fatima, like she has survived every other crisis. But this is clearly, evidently, the worst crisis the church has ever suffered. But and then to go back to Paul VI, if I may. He said, the opening to the world at Vatican II became, quote, a veritable invasion of the church by worldly thinking. We have perhaps been too weak and imprudent.
Well, and so that's why we have two parties in the church, because now you have those people who are supporting the invasion of the church and saying that's a good thing that we have all this modernism in the church. It's a good thing we have all this new thinking, which is contrary to what the church has always taught. Then you have those people who are holding up the teaching of what the church has always taught from the beginning.
Exactly, and that brings us to the next aspect of this situation. Why are there false friends of Fatima? Well, the false friends have emerged in the context of a crisis in the church. A crisis in the church which is accompanied by a crisis in the world that the currently reigning pope likens to the fall of the Roman Empire. And because of that crisis, you mentioned the phrase two parties. Two parties have arisen in the church. And one theme of this book is that the two parties are the party of tradition, what the church has always believed and taught and practiced, and the party of the innovators. The innovators who want to change the church, who want to throw open the window so the fresh air comes in when actually the smoke of Satan comes in. And this party of the innovators is the party in which we find these false friends of Fatima. Now that might sound like hysterical, over-the-top characterization of people who simply disagree with us about Fatima. But listen to what Pius XII said when he was still Secretary of State under Pius XI. And this is in 1931. And this is from a biography of Pius XII. Pius XII Before History, published in Paris in 1972, quoting from pages 52 and 53. Speaking of Fatima, the future Pius XII said, I am worried by the Blessed Virgin's messages to little Lucia of Fatima. This persistence of Mary about the dangers which menace the church is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul. I hear all around me innovators who wish to dismantle the sacred chapel, destroy the universal flame of the church, reject her ornaments, and make her feel remorse for her historical past. And then he goes on to make this prophecy in light of the message of Fatima. A day will come when the civilized world will deny its God, when the church will doubt, as Peter doubted. She will be tempted to believe that man has become God. In our churches, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them. Like Mary Magdalene, weeping before the empty tomb, they will ask, where have they taken him? He's talking about the liturgical revolution, sanctuary lamps being taken out of the church. Well, no, take the sacrament right out of the church, right. Take it off the main altar, take it out of the center of the church, put it in a room somewhere in the back, or even not have it at all, and so that people come to church. Why do we have churches? We have churches because it's the house of God, house of prayer. Well, what do you put in the house of God? You put God in the Blessed Sacrament. But instead, they move it to the side if they can't take it out altogether. You have to look at, is it on this side, is it on that side, where is it? And looking for the red lamp, you don't see it. He predicted that in 1931. We lived through this for the last 25 years. That he would say specifically, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them. And that's exactly what happened. The red lamps were taken out.
The red lamps and the Blessed Sacrament itself often. So.
Right out of the sanctuary. And so that explains why we have these two parties in the church. The innovators have been involved in a wrecking operation since the Second Vatican Council, which Paul VI himself lamented. He spent the last part of his pontificate wringing his hands, walking the halls in the Vatican, weeping, it is reported, over the mass defections from the priesthood.
50,000
liturgical-
were lost between 65 and 75.
And he wondered why it happened.
And they've never recovered them. They had 455,000 priests in 1965. We still only have 410,000 priests today. And although the population of the Catholic world has gone from, say, 600 or 700 million to over 1 billion, the number of priests has actually diminished from that time to the present time.
We've never seen anything like it in church history. And so this party of the innovators is really the party that has given to us these false friends of Fatima. And I guess we're just about out of time, but in the next segment we could perhaps talk about what the book discusses in terms of the party line of the party of the innovators. Every party, if you're going to talk in terms of parties and a struggle for dominance, for power, every party has a party line. You have to follow that party line if you want to be a member of the party. And whoever doesn't follow the party line is expelled.
Well, that's one thing. The other thing is this: when you have the truth, if everyone tells the truth, then you're not going to contradict each other because we're all telling the truth. But when the party line is based on a lie, then you have to have the same lie, because if you don't have the same lie, they say, well, you said this and he said that, and you're contradicting each other. So you have to have a party line which is the same lie that everybody says. That's why you have a party line. That's why Stalin and Lenin came up with that idea to save the party from being caught in their lies, because they said the lie is sacred. And of course, the lie is sacred to the devil. That is, the devil is a liar and a murderer from the beginning.
Well, maybe in the next segment we can talk about the details of that party line and how it has been implemented and imposed from the top down in the church.
And how it's come from the bottom up also. This is the program, False Friends of Fatima, regarding Chris's new book, The False Friends of Fatima. And it's a great book. You should read it, but certainly watch the next program as we explain to you how the False Friends of Fatima work, operate, and how they're attacking you and your soul. God bless you. Remember to pray the rosary every day.